welcome Ashish Raj for this podcast. This is a kind of a podcast where you are not supposed to be saying any reason beyond what you can reach out for the world, right? So now I'm with an engineer telling myself and teaching myself what is it all about when you're working in the field of DevOps, MLOps, and forget the fact that there is an existence of these technology. But apart from that, are we architecting a solution which is more sustainable and future ready? That's what I always care about. And I'm here to learn that. And in this journey, I have interviewed a lot of engineers like Ashish Raj sir, and many more people are yet to be coming. And hopefully, we demystify the ways in which we are supposed to be doing all that hustle over a course of time. I think thank you so much, Ashish sir, for giving this podcast. And he's a vivid speaker, and there is an Azure Easy community which thoroughly focuses on the Azure tech as well. So I think probably a person who has mingled with so many people in the community, I think probably he can give a lot of insights about it. I think thank you so much, sir, for giving this podcast. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Vishwas. So thanks for having me here, and it's a different way of interacting with community for me. This is I have never done any podcast yet. I mean, I have done webinars, I have done meetups, I have done the pre-recorded things. That's what I started with, but hopefully this is the new format, and let's see how it works out.
What do you think about the hype and the hope on which we are relying, which we are relying on the DevOps today? Because to some people it's still an hype, but most of them have understood the fact that it's an hope. And what is it all about? Because a lot of times when we are architecting a solution, something like probably let me just say something, we want to move from an monolithic to microservice, then a serverless. Probably there's a lot of chaotic environment. And there is a lot of engineering aspect which comes up. So I want you to really address the fact that what is it all about? Is it a hype or a hope?
It's both. I mean, as you said. So for many people, it's still a hype, and many of the people have been able to experience the transformation it can bring to the organization, to the individuals, and to your product. So it brings in the value to to all the people who are involved in it, or to all the entity who are involved in it, starting from the employee to the customer to the company and to the product itself. So it's a hope, but hype in a sense that when people start with it, and DevOps, there is a very, very fundamental thing about DevOps is it's more about experimenting. And when you go with that particular attitude, experimenting, then you may come across a situation where you may have to accept the failures. And that's when this hype versus hope discussion starts, like whether doing it right, or whether it's even worth enough to invest the time, or all those aspects comes into picture where you question this technology, or this process, this culture, whatever. I mean, people define it in different ways. Ultimately, it's all about how you're going to take it, as an organization, as an employee, or as a team. How you're going to take it gonna define it, like, whether you are take it as a culture, whether you're taking it as a tool, whether you're taking it as just a team. You bring four people with certain skill set, and you tell this is our DevOps team. This can be also a definition for people. And when you start with this approach, and when you're not getting the result, right, that's when this argument comes, hype or something. But those people who started with a very, very fundamental understanding that this is a experimentation, the very, very fundamental thought process we have to be in, that we are going to experiment, continuously experiment, learn it, adapt to it, and progress it further. Those people definitely see it as a hope, because they can see it works out. Not initially maybe, but slowly it works out for them, for their company, for the product, for the people. So it's both of the things. But yes, definitely from the positive side, it's a hope. It's a hope. When you come across a particular level, you definitely see that it's not the hype only. It's a hope. But yeah, up to a level, you might be questioning yourself, you might be questioning this aspect itself, and you might be coming across the valid argument. I'm not saying those arguments are not correct. Those are valid argument at that particular phase, with that particular experiment that you have done. You will see that as a hype, because you're not getting the result, but it's a part of the journey. You have to continue it. You have to have that mindset of experiment, and then that's how I see it.
Do you really feel that highly regulated DevOps is going to give something much more humongous than what we are thinking? Because a lot of times when we think of deployment, it's not just architecting it, then throwing it on a GitHub repo, or else just making sure that the pipelines run. It's all about like how much is the restriction that is imposed on you as well, because not everybody gets an access to the production like Netflix. Netflix has open source. They every production, like everybody has an access to what's happening in the Netflix architecture. And I really wanted to know how much can be the potential of an restricted and an unrestricted DevOps environment, because a lot of times that still is a story that is yet to be demystified and yet to be taught. Because I probably can think of Azure DevOps as one website which has everything, but there is yet in a bigger organization when there is an huge deployments happening. Like let me just say Microsoft gets updated every 50,000 times in a day. Like it's how they are building it over a course of time. But I wanted to understand like how is it possible, because unrestricted environment and a restricted environment deployment, like the way you interact with the dev and ops team starts changing. And I just wanted to know what is it all about when we are talking about the freedom in the DevOps world.
You rightly pointed out, and this is the very, very initial struggle with all the team that I have seen. Whether you take it from the development organization or whether you take it from the operational, operations, or you talk to other people as well, security, architecture, those traditional silos. When you're talking to them, this is the very, very first fundamental thing that hits you. How much restrictive it is, and definitely when we are talking about, you are not having the full access to deploy, you have to go through a process, and that process will actually put things in places, in dev or in pre-prod or whatsoever. So this is a very valid question which comes across initially. Now, when we target this particular question or this particular scenario with a typical mindset of process oriented organization, right? Those organizations which has been working with the process. So they see these changes as a process change, right? When they see these changes as a process change, definitely it feels like those restrictions. It feels like something that I do not have access to, and I have been forced to follow a process where it will go from a pipeline, where it will go from a branch to a pull request and pull request to a particular, CI pipeline, and that.
The
So
regular
it's been
version of work.
right. So people feel it like a forced thing to them, right? Developer will say, you know what? Earlier it was a very simple thing. I would just right click Visual Studio, click deploy on Azure Web App or IS wherever. I don't care anything else, and I know my application is working on local system. It is going to work on the production or on the server, and do your QA over there, do your testing over there. I don't really want to get into these processes of pull request and all. When they see these things as a process change, definitely these questions comes. And when we are talking about these new implementation, I would say ML ops, right? Where you are not even talking to those traditional developers, right? So DevOps up to a particular level has been able to gain acceptance in the developer community, though traditional developer community like .NET, Node, React. I mean, those people who are doing JavaScript based development or .NET or Java, they are pretty much, whether you take it as a acceptance because of the adoption or because they understood the value, it doesn't matter, but it has got the acceptance over there, and it has been part of their ecosystem, at least up to a certain level, if we are talking about big organization or middle scale organization and even in startup. But when we are talking about these guys, ML ops, data engineers, data scientists, those people who are yet to get into the understanding from using Python, uh, apart from being a data scientist, how this Python works, as a typical developer. What are the unit tests I'm going to write? Because traditionally in the data science, life cycle, that is not a important ingredient, right? It's just a, it feels like for them, just like developers, it feels like a forced thing to them as well. So for those guys, the same question comes for those new set of people as well. The answer to this is, you don't see it as a process change. If you see it as a process change, it will look like a process. If you see it from the culture point of view, why version control? Very simple. I mean, when I am advocating for version control with a data scientist, I'm going to tell what is the benefit of using a version control for a data brick notebook, or for a Python file they are building. Instead of talking about this is how you are going to configure it, this is how these are the commands you are going to use it, these are the push and all. Those things are very simple for them. I would say just one Google, they will know everything. The only thing is that they have to have the interest to know it. And that is what the missing piece, many places, what I have seen, when they talk about this restrictive environment, uh, there is a reason for having that restriction, first of all. And actually it's not a restriction. When you when people start using it, when a data scientist start experiencing, when he can understand, okay, whatever the model changes I have done in last 1 week, I can actually go back to any one of the version on the code level, and I can get it back, right? You can get it back into your system without having to worry about all those difficult way of similar thing for developer as well. But because developers has been using it, the simple thing makes sense to them, bit easy. But for data scientists, for data engineers, it may look like an unwanted process change. So we deal with this particular way. Similarly in the deployment also, you have to just tell why exactly. Because see, uh, from the developer point of view, as I said, uh, somehow because of the hype that it has created in the higher level management, we are able to kind of advocate it bit easy into the developer community compared to the ML ops or the data science community. Now, there, the major thing that I think the DevOps culture mindset brings in, because when you are working on a data science project, you have resources which are really expensive resources in terms of cluster, in terms of the compute where your models are going to run for the training process and the testing process. Those are really expensive resources, and you want to understand how I'm going to make it cost effective in a long term. It's not about creating the model at once. So when you explain these things to them, that going through these processes will make sure that we have a very optimized resource. We are going to use that resource only when we need it. That's how we are going to make it happen. And then it makes sense, and slowly it gets accepted in all these communities. Talking about DevOps community, where developers are or operations are involved, or ML ops.
But I wanted to understand, like, how do we administer the fact that there is an existence of a process? Because a lot of times when we think of DevOps as an administration tool, like, let me just
Yeah,
say, it's not about just DevOps pipeline, just
yeah,
build this, that.
right,
There are Scrum masters who look at every card of it. Like,
right.
that's actually the worst part of DevOps, because everything gets tracked. But at the end of the day, I do feel like sometimes I'm a researcher, but like, to me, not every day is that productive,
Yeah,
because
right.
to me, people might say you're not analyzing the data properly, so the model didn't come up proper. And to an
Yeah.
MLOps guy, there is a terabytes of data. Can he sit and annotate everything? It's all automated over a course of time. But I wanted to know, how are we administering this entire infrastructure which is already available for us? Because When I had a podcast with John Willis last week, and he was more into Deming. And Deming is a guy who has never touched computer, and this man is more inclined towards the Deming process of like saying, "Hey, this is what this entire architecture needs to be," and things like that. But I wanted to know, how are we administering this entire infrastructure which is already available, but how are we catering to the needs? Because like when you think of makemytrip.com, he didn't have the same data pattern which he got after the pandemic, because not everybody had the same way of traveling. There was no there it was actually sparse over a course of time. So I wanted to understand, like, how are we catering to the needs through this entire infrastructure which is already available to us in a form of a DevOps software, probably, or else a DevOps infrastructure which is already being coded.
Yeah, so as I said, you have to go into the piece by piece. The first thing is that I try to understand, from the when I am going into the discussion where I have a team where I am being told that this is how the team is working, or this is how the team is going to work. The first thing is that whether it is greenfield or brownfield. I mean, if it is already working, then it becomes a kind of a little bit of interviewing on the people in the existing process, and take piece by piece. You don't really try to frame everything at once and try to put it everything at once, or try to give it everything to everyone, to developers, to operations, to security, to operate architecture. Not everything to everyone. Try to understand if things can be broken. For example, for me, bringing MLOps team into the day, into the culture of DevOps, the first thing I want to tell them that having a version control, using the version control in a effective way is the most important ingredient to start with. So if I will try to plan it in a way typical DevOps or MLOps pipeline architecture, getting a reference architecture from some big organizations like Microsoft, Netflix, or those people who are really elite performers in those areas, it will not work in my opinion. uh, the best thing that can work is that understanding their reference architecture, pick a piece from there, maybe try to understand, maybe to kind of a little bit of change there, try to align with your team, the people you are working with, and then let them use that particular piece and try to understand how they are feeling about it. Quick wins, small wins, then slowly try to add typical things, then go for the CI pipeline if needed. Again, that is also one of the things that I try to advocate with people. Not everything is applicable to everyone, right? So what Netflix is doing, what Google is doing, what Microsoft is doing, it's a good reference architecture, definitely. And if your product is very much similar to those products, definitely you can try to study those reference architecture. But again, your product is your product, your people are your people, right? So people are the most important ingredient in your product building process, and you have to understand your people, right? Very basic fundamental of DevOps culture as well. So if your people are not skilled enough, right, that is also a very, very important point from the adoption point of view of the DevOps. Uh, I'm not saying using pipeline as a code or using XYZ infrastructure as a code tool is not a best practice. It's a best practice, but you have to make sure your team is ready to adopt those tools as well. You have to work with your people. You have to make them comfortable till the point they understand the aspect and they become advocate of those things, instead of you are forcing again as a process, as a restriction, as a guideline. uh, DevOps should be driven by the people itself. And yes, you need to learn those architecture, reference architecture. You need to go out from the study that people have done, you know Dora report, you go to the Google report, you go to the Microsoft. They have Microsoft its own journey listed there on their website. You can go there, understand what these guys have done, which change the perspective of their employees. Similar thing we can do here, but it's your people. It's not Microsoft employees. So that is also one of the very, very important point over there.
But what about this entire data that we are actually consuming? And it's dynamic and it's not static. Like I'm going to get 25 gigs of data in this point of time. It's like it can change, and there's no limit for the ML ops to play a major role in understanding what is this all about, what is this architecture all about, and things like that. So I wanted to understand like what is the real change that is required, because there are some unanswered canonical problems that are still existing, though we
Yes.
have such a sophisticated process which has been designed over years and years of experience of having such kind of chaotic environment. Also we still have this chaos engineering. So I wanted to
Yes.
know how far have we achieved the answers to all the questions that we are facing today when it comes to data engineering as well as architecting something new for building an intelligence.
Yes, to be very honest, it's a quite a interesting topic today. When we are talking right now, the technology is available. People are experimenting with it, and to be very honest, it's not a what I would say a complete blueprint or template somewhere where you can pick it and you can use it and it will work out for you in terms of data, collecting data, or detecting the changes in the data pattern, and then going back into your modeling process, and then make sure that those data changes are reflecting into your modeling process, the data modeling, machine learning modeling process, or your applications, whatever you have deployed there. So technology is available, processes are available, but it's a very, very interesting time right now when we are talking that data science has moved out of that academic area now. So what I see that, I would say 2 years or 3 years back, data science was still a kind of a process where you are learning, what is oops, I will just compare it with the programming language, things that you are just understanding what is oops concept, and you're trying to implement those concepts into your simple program, or maybe trying to implement that. But it has moved from there. The academic area has kind of somehow been able to understand the business problems and business solutions are being built. Now it comes to the production area where your question comes into picture, where how exactly you are going to make sure that your modeling process are equally standard when you are talking about other teams like developers, other development stack, other areas in your organization, infrastructure development, or other places, how data science organization can also act like that only. How the application life cycle can be managed in a similar way, or can be at least standardized in a way. Earlier, it was one person doing all the things, Conda environment, his Conda environment. There is no other engineer who can understand that Conda environment. And when you are going to the infrastructure people to deploy it, first of all, they will ask, oh, these many libraries, we will have to get the security approval, all those things. So there are, there were a lot of silos where standards were not defined. But now with these reference architecture from Microsoft, Google, and other people who has been doing this for a while, they have come up with the processes what we are calling these days MLOps. And architecture is there, technology is there, tools are there. But yes, because as I said, it's not like a traditional development process where you just align these tools and they will work. It's a culture, just like DevOps. MLOps, for a reason, MLOps has a relationship with DevOps. It is also a cultural change rather than a technology change. So technology is there, services are there, reference is there, architecture is there, study is also there, but it's a cultural change. You have to align with your data scientist. You have to understand your data engineers capabilities, data engineering team, and you can kind of bring that particular MLOps life cycle where we can get the data in, those changes can be captured. But these are all a learning experience at this moment. It is very much interesting topic at this moment when we are talking. It's very much similar to what DevOps was, I would say 7 or 8 years back. 7, 8 years back, uh, of course, people were doing DevOps before that as well, but it just came into picture out of the blue. People were talking about DevOps. Okay, DevOps, DevOps. Everyone wants to do DevOps. So these kind of MLOps is in a very, very same place where people want to use those, concept being introduced by these industry leaders, and then uh, implementation is very, very much into the experimentation phase, I will say. Uh, Although there are templates, there are architecture which you can refer, which you can study, and then try to implement them with your applications.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know, because we are thinking of scalability also. It's not
yeah,
about, it's all about trade-offs. Today, it's all about
yes,
trade-offs because it's like you want the performance, be ready to have a trade-off with your security at one given point. Not all performing architectures will have the same old sturdy security because there are case studies where people have really witnessed, okay, this has gone bad because we opted for the security, and this has gone bad in terms of performance because we had to literally compromise on the security. So to us, performance was not a big deal, but security was the biggest deal. But I wanted to know, because we are talking about machine learning fairness, security of machine learning, because there's black box attack which can really happen on your neural network. It's not like you throw up H5PB on X file, it's not secure because it's still a file format, it's still a file system. And if you ask any Linux administrator, he literally says it's a part of any culture that we have just been through. Like, it's still a
yes.
file. We still handle it as a file, but there are underlying complexities in scalability as well. So how does a DevOps guy or a DevOps engineer who has been working on a scalable system think about scalability over a course of time when there is not chaos, but when there's a requirement of sudden scalability? Like, there can be a tsunami way of saying, hey, we got 25 million hits in 1 second, what to do now? So how is it
Uh,
all about thinking when we are thinking of all these kind of scalability and the platforms which we are thinking today?
Yes. Again, it's again come with that particular fact where first of all we have to understand the fact that not you are not going to get everything at one go. That is a very, very, clear statement you have to make with your with your management, with your business, or it's a thing that needs a innovative style of working within organization or within team. And that's why, whenever a big organization wants to kind of experiment or wants to get into this culture, they want to look at those set of people who are ready to get into this particular interesting journey. So it's not a day one job. Definitely you are not going to get everything on day one. You're not going to get like, I'm going to work on this project, this DevOps project, I'm going to transform this project in 6 months, I'm going to get a same working application with same level of security without having to have any failure after 6 months on this date. This is not going to work. I mean, at least I would not commit for that. What I will commit for that is what is the sustainable failure that my business can accept, based on the pieces that we are working on. Again, I am going to break those things into the pieces. So talking about DevOps, traditional DevOps. Okay, first of all, let's talk about version control. Then we talk about CI pipeline. Then we talk about deployment process. Most of the time business is critical during the deployment phase. Before deployment, what are the changes you are doing? It's all about how your team feels about those changes, because still the application will be deployed in the same way it has been getting deployed. So you don't really directly go ahead and automate or try to implement this continuous deployment in the one go. You first work with your team and you try to understand, and all these things are working behind the scene. So that is the benefit that you have. It's no way hitting the business interest, right? Deployment is still happening the same way. Your all those dependencies are, say, you are handling in the same way. You are just telling your team that, you know what, to attain that level of CD or that level of reliability, we have to first work out on these foundational things, that is version control, code review, pull request. Can we have these things? Do you think it is, it is even going to benefit us as a this particular team? So it's piece by piece again. And then, of course, when you kind of get with that particular mindset, of course, initially you may face those initial struggle with the team, with the people, and you have to have that communication style which DevOps, kind of recommend. Failure is a thing. That's it. There is no big deal. Failure is going to happen. You know what? There is no postmortem. There is no, it's postmortem, but it's not a, it's not going to be a blame one, where you're going to blame somebody. It is a blameless postmortem on all those things. And then what happens is that when you achieve a place where it is going to be a kind of a change which is going to affect the running system, whatever the risk you are going to take, it is going to affect the running system in terms of deployment, in terms of functionality, in terms of whatsoever it may be. That's where you need to, give this confidence to your, people who are leading us, that, what, our team is pretty much confident. We have been able to do these many, we have done all these experiment, we have failed these many times, we have passed these many times, and that's how it looks like. Now we are going to take this next level where we are going to implement the microservices architecture. You don't go for microservices architecture in one day. If you go for that, then definitely your business is going to expect too much from you. And I don't think engineers you have who are working on a monolith today are going to transform on those skill set, those cultural changes in one day or maybe within 1 month. It takes time, and it's more of cultural change, what I see, because technology anyone can learn. And as you can see today's, there are, there are a number of technology every day you are supposed to explore with, and every month you are actually learning a new technology, I would say. If you are working in a this kind of setup, DevOps, all uh, you know 6 months back you don't know Terraform. Now you are supposed to be expert on Terraform, not only working on it. So it becomes a difficult thing. Many times people ask, how many years of experience you have on Terraform? I don't have many years of experience. I just done one project. I am confident enough that I can work with you. That's the kind of a confidence your engineer should be giving you. And that's when, things will start plugging in. You make you know, a kind of a puzzle slowly, and though that puzzle slowly start making a figure, and you start getting a confidence that, what, we have built something. It looks like something. It looks like something Netflix is doing. It looks like something Google is doing. Of course, it's not what Google is doing, but it looks like that. And that's how I think we can achieve that level of scalability, that level of agility, that level of reliability. Those things are those things are going to come slowly. It's not a one-day job, I would say.
First, we are thinking of refactoring everything that we have today.
Yes.
And there is something called as distribution of all the systems. And there is a new trend which is called as distributed tracing, because that's where your performance is like not just analyzed, but it's just a kind of an intuition that it gives you that, hey, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And there's DevSecOps, which is also coming
Yeah.
up, like which is like saying what you have been doing, but stressing on the security part and doing the same old job.
Yeah.
Today we had a session on Key Vault, and
Yeah.
there are hundreds of technologies which are coming up, but I don't know whether to refactor, whether to think about a new trend, because not all the applications have the same old capability. Like you can't leave an ghost, you can't leave a ghosted server for rent in such a way that, like, hey, my business is going to shut down for a week or a day. probably today, even a second, if it just goes down, probably there is a huge discussion which happens like, hey, the system went down, what was the wrong, there was a chaos experience and things like that. But I wanted to know, what is this refactoring, this new trend which is popping up? Like, performance is the key factor today. Like, nobody cares about what happens behind it, but performance is the
Right.
key, because everybody needs the same old experience. But what
Right.
is it all about when we are refactoring the same old approaches and the same old architecture that we had right now? And when we are thinking of something future ready, what is this refactoring all about through the DevOps environment? That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so this particular approach, again, this was and is a question which comes around most of the companies who are migrating to cloud. You know what happens? A cloud provider when sells the cloud, when a cloud provider sells its product to a company, they sell all these fancy words to them, right? Containerization, microservices architecture, all those fancy words which CTO and those CIOs are hearing at multiple places. And Microsoft goes to them and, you know what, we have all these things, you're going to use it from day one. And they want to use it from day one, and that's where the architecture team has to come place. And then DevOps is also supposed to be used. I mean, they want to transform their team using this particular cultural mindset or whatsoever they thought about it. They just want to make use of this particular aspect as well. So in my opinion, I again, in those scenarios also, I try to uh, kind of break this requirement in multiple, what I would say, at least three sections. First is that if you have, and that's how I see the cloud movement as well, which started few years back and is continuing. It's exactly following the same pattern which I think, and I think I'm taking it from there itself. First of all, you just move everything to the cloud, if at all that's your purpose. You know what? Lift and shift kind of model. No refactoring, nothing is, we are not going to change the way your developers are working. We are not going to change the operations, the way operations are working. And you are not going to change the way monitoring is happening on your application. Of course, Microsoft is going to give you a little bit of different services, different monitoring capabilities which you can start using it. But if you are not ready enough, that's fine. You can still make use of your existing processes. You're just moving your applications to your, so that actually reduces the stress on your team members, on your employees, to go into the change in a, in one single go. That's the first set, which has already happened. Actually, many of the organizations has learned this particular journey and has been to this journey. Now comes the second part where you need to understand, okay, we have done the migration, the lift and shift kind of thing. Now let's see what are the things which Microsoft offers, and that can be implemented without having to get into a lot of you know customization, lot of refactoring, either on the code level or on the architecture level. And that's where replacing SQL Server with SQL, Azure SQL, replacing certain things with certain things. Or that's where DevOps guys will come into picture. He will say, you know what, you are deploying your virtual machine using Portal, why don't you use a simple PowerShell script? Very simple. I mean, I'm not going to tell you to learn Terraform or ARM template or anything. It's a simple PowerShell which your administrators are already using it, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to give you the script. Your administrators are already familiar with it. No code level architectural change. Very simple approach. And then once they get the feeling, what I'm going to say, you are putting your PowerShell script on a file system. Why don't you use version control? Your developer team is using version control. You use the version control, you put the PowerShell script, and then the next thing, I'm going to put it in CI pipeline. You know what? No need to run it ad hoc level. You run it. Let's understand how, when are you going to run it? That's in your control. You want to run it on demand, you want to run it on an automated process, we can define that, but we are going to introduce these toolings to you. And when they are familiar with these things, that's when come to the picture where we will say we are going to use Terraform or ARM template. Your administrator is supposed to use those things. And slowly you transform your administration team into the developer, into a kind of an infrastructure developer, so that they can understand the developer's language without changing the, because you transform your developers, no problem, you transform your developer to to transform your application into a containerized Docker image. Who are going to run it? Your administrators are going to run it. If they are not pretty much confident with the toolings, with the processes, or the concepts which are required to run a Dockerized image in a Kubernetes cluster in Azure, those Kubernetes YAML file, those Terraform files, if they are not familiar enough, they are not up to that level, then what you're going to do? Developer will keep on popping up the new images. The administrator will keep on stopping them and telling them, oh, boss, we are still releasing the last one. You are releasing another one. We are not yet ready. Because we are using those manual processes. We are not having those tools yet. So you bring them on these tools using the technologies which are easy for them, which are still familiar to them, and then slowly transform those technologies to them. PowerShell to Terraform, PowerShell to ARM template, slowly Ansible is coming into picture, slowly CI pipeline is coming into picture. And that's when we tell, what, now developer is changing their code in a Docker image. Will you go ahead and figure out what a Docker file is? We are talking about transforming a person who is deploying virtual machine on a portal, and next day we are telling them that they are supposed to deploy a Docker file in a Kubernetes cluster. That's a lot to ask. So we have to, and that is how I think teams can be transformed in a very, it has to be start from the very beginning during the architecture process. That's when you decide upon how you're going to lift and shift, whether you are going to do the refactoring, what would be the refactoring technology you are going to use, how you are going to make ready your developers and administrator. So architect can refactor whatever he wants to, but the thing is that it's going to be done by developers and administrators. So if architect will give you a full fancy architecture, which can be a very best practices, and everything is fast, SaaS, all those fancy words, right? And then all of the sudden developers is saying, you know what, this is too much. And then administrator is saying, you know what, we know how to do this in portal, but you are asking us to do it in a very different way, and we might be able to do it, but we are not able to understand it, why we are doing it. And that is the major challenge I see, that they have to do it because they understand why they are doing it, not as a process change. Not, Ashish, we were doing it with the portal, now my organization is asking we need to do it with Terraform. Why we are doing with Terraform? Why should I learn Terraform? I said, okay, this is the reason you need to learn Terraform. Instead of explaining them, we are being told, or they are being forced to use it. And that's how see.
This is
Yeah,
the
yeah, please go ahead.
curse and the blessing of DevOps. There is
Yeah,
no one time solution. Like every engineer has its own. And this podcast literally started for understanding what was it all about. I thought, okay, one experienced guy, one intern, one fresher. But every individual has their own approach, and every individual has
yes,
their own criteria, because
right,
it's not like me saying pipeline as code as the new trend.
right,
It's like
right,
it's a requirement over a course of time.
yes,
Like it's going to be a requirement because there are a lot of moving parts in an institution. Like
right,
no company is now an no person's ego problem. It's like if you are in a startup that will be run by
yeah,
a person who is fetching money from some investor, but when the company goes public, it's all moving. It's like
yes,
one team might come up with some approach, one team might
yes,
come up with different approaches. Yeah, I think you pretty much summed up the psychological aspects of all the
right.
things. I think, but
right.
but last question. This is the last question that I'm going to ask you. But what is it all about when we are building a team of DevOps engineer, but there is a gap in which we all have in the approaches? But there's a developer who is always developing with his own favorite tools. There are some favorite stack that he literally follows. But what is it all required when we are summing up all together as one build, or is that one button which always combines all these efforts? Because a lot of times we are now thinking of CI/CDs, but I feel there is no architected solution for all the things that we are talking about because it's all scattered. You said
Yep.
about the Terraform, but Pulumi is amazing.
Yes.
Pulumi is
Yep.
literally amazing, but like, why are we not migrating? But there's a market trend. So I wanted to understand what's the roadmap to the right DevOps culture and the right DevOps learning that we need to get, because we all don't know what it is all about tomorrow. So that's why I'm asking you this question.
Yeah, there also, yeah, I mean, I have seen, different trends in different organizations. Even when I have worked with few organizations, and even when I'm interacting with people and trying to understand how, how things are working in their organization. So I have seen where people are trying to form these DevOps team. Uh, you know, they are hiring certain people with certain skill set, and I am not really against it, I would say. Maybe that's how it is working for them. And that if it is working, then it's fine. I mean, ultimately the overall goal is to get the productivity, right? So if you're getting a productivity in a particular way, then it's DevOps for you. There is no denial in that fact. But in my understanding, more or less, when I am talking about a DevOps team, I am really thinking your current team, what exactly your current team is right now. And I am thinking, what would be a DevOps culture will look like with the same team. So, it's not a separate team altogether that I am looking at. Of course, there will be certain skill set, technology, or something that might be required additional to what you are doing today. So suppose today your organization is entirely on premises. You are not using any cloud to say, and in your organization, current employee, there is no one who has the skill set on probably on Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, whichever your preferred primary cloud is. Then maybe you might want to open some requisition based on those skill set. But again, it will not be a DevOps team member or something. It's just another addition of a skill set in your current team. What I look at is that how we are going to start, what exactly the correct way to start. And that's where, again, this particular piece will come into picture, where I'm going to break this thing and want to understand how I can make these, current component that we have, infrastructure engineers, security, architecture, developers, and pick small things from the DevOps cultural point of view. So maybe they are looking for DevOps because developers have just started using these Scrum or Agile process, right? So they might have just started it, and then somehow they understood that there would be a DevOps team or DevOps thing in the background who is going to support them. Okay, so I started with that particular thing, that how do I form, or how do you actually, go towards forming a DevOps team or forming a DevOps organization in your team. So what I was saying that, there is a trend, or there is a set of organization who are building a typical DevOps team, right? Where, they are hiring certain people, typically marketed as DevOps skill set. Those people knows Jenkins, all, those tools which are typically help you to implement those DevOps culture and things like that. But what I feel like, instead of separating these concerns, right, and just building another uh, team in your organization and then still working in silos, right, you need to figure out how to break those silos. And that is the main objective of bringing this DevOps culture or MLOps culture or whatsoever you may call it. That's the exact thing that people wanted to do when they started, and that's exactly what we are trying to do. Of course, technology has changed, people have changed, things have changed, but the ultimate fundamental thing that we want to achieve is the same thing: breaking the silos. And if you are bringing another silo, right, then you are not really solving that problem, but you are actually continuing that problem. And after 2 or 3 years, you will have, just like, you have a dev team, you have an ops team, and then you have a DevOps team, especially for pipeline creation, especially for administrating your tools and all. Instead of that, and then what happens is that that is also one problem that I have seen in some of the organization, that since you have a team, your developer or your operations or your security try to put the accountability on that team instead of being part of that particular responsibility. That is also one of the very important criteria, that shared responsibility, right? You have to be you have so when security guy tells a developer that this is the thing that you need to take care on the code level, so it's not like, security guys has the responsibility to discover that. It's a shared responsibility where developers should feel why security is stopping us to use these frameworks or to use these libraries, and why they are, letting us do a particular, a particular function or a particular class in a particular way, right? While they are scanning. So there should be a region. There should not be a kind of a just another team who is telling, okay, you have the application, you have the infrastructure, I'm going to build the pipeline for you. So that's how I see. You look into your team, you try to figure out how you are going to transform these guys to use those tools, whether it is Azure DevOps, whether it is Jenkins, whether it is Kubernetes, whether it is, some cloud platform. And of course, there will be responsibilities. Of course, operations team is not going to do the code, and code developer team is not going to transform into doing some operations job. There will be a responsibility, but it will be more or less shared responsibility. You are breaking those silos slowly letting them know each other responsibility, slowly letting them know each other problems as well, right? Many times it happens that developer will come their own typical problem. You know what? We want this machine size, and our infrastructure team is not ready to give us, or something, anything which is being stored by the infrastructure team or the security team. So they are feeling more restrictive, as just like we started, right? So they are feeling more restrictive rather than understanding the whole concept or the whole shared responsibility. And it may happen that when you open that collaboration, when you open that channel, it may happen that infrastructure team will understand your requirement and may put a new guideline where you will be able to use those exceptions. That can also happen, but that is a slow change. That is again a DevOps culture which your organization has to bring. And that's why I say it's not a 1 day thing. It's not a 1 month thing. It's a continuous thing. You have to understand your people. You have to understand your product, and you have to understand how you're going to break those small, quick wins. If you are able to break those small, quick wins on the very early stage, you architect your DevOps journey in that particular way. You tell your developers, you know what? We are not talking about complete version control, CI, CD, and CD, and then continuous feedback, and then there is a SRE team. Everything, we are not talking about that. What we are asking you, can you work with the version control? Can you? We don't have a pull request system. Do you think it makes sense to us? They will definitely say, yes, it makes sense. When you have a pull request, when you have a branching strategy, your operations team will be more than happy to help you to deploy those, those things into a QA environment. And then they will be more interested in understanding how to automate those things, because that's the extra work they are getting. So they want to automate. Earlier, it was complete getting the code. Now I have to make sure that everything is working. Then only I'm going to move it to the production. And that's why they will have some cab call. They will have a lot of discussions. They will have a lot of manual things. And then that's where, things get, twisted, and then it gets delayed. people do not able to understand each other context, why infrastructure is stopping, why developers is not able to understand what is the what is the limitation that infrastructure has. So that's how I see you transform your team. That's how all the elite has done. uh, no one has hired a special set of team, and they are still working in that Windows or SCCM or those, those silos area.
Cubicles.
I mean,
Cubicles.
they are broken.
Yeah, that's true. That's true because it's more of that understanding that is required. It's not about
Yes,
like, like every day there's an open source which is changing, and I
yes,
think we can't keep up with the phase in which they are so dynamic. But let's just accept the fact that we are human beings, not machines, to understand everything
yeah,
over a course of time. Let's build
right,
an sustainable DevOps team. I think this
exactly.
was actually what you told, and probably this was the best thing that anybody could have done because most of the time it's not the complex jargons that we play with. It's all about the actual build that is going to happen and actual money that is going to be minted from the same
Exactly,
build.
right.
Yeah, I think thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this podcast. I think we covered a lot of insights about not just people, but regarding what is supposed to be happening in the DevOps world. I think thank you so much for this podcast, sir. It was very insightful talking to you right now.
Thank you so much for having me, and it looks like a good format for me. Looks like it's working. So hopefully I will be kind of. It looks like a good thing. It was just the very first time I have done this kind of interactivity. So and thank you so much for inviting me. And
Yes, sir.
hope yeah.
So, hey guys, this is just an outro which we just recorded after talking for a very long time, and then after party of our podcast. Generally have a talk with my guests around saying that, hey, this is what we will be working on, this is what I want to work on, and some people give me a lot of guidance, and I think Ashish sir actually gave a wonderful insight about what community can really do for you. It's not about forget the fact that there is a really big chance that you're going to earn good amount of swags, but I would say just listen to this outro. You will understand what's the biggest impact that it can happen on you because you learn a lot, you teach, you also inspire people. So check this out.
You know
I
what?
can record it. I can record it if you can share it to. I can add it as an outro.
Yeah. You can see what happened is that initial 7 years I never worked with any community. I was not even aware that something like this can be done. Uh, any community work
Hmm.
and actually, like you said, I was not even aware that I am worth enough, or is there something I can share with people, where they can actually get some insight out of it. And I'm not talking about as an expert or something. I'm just thinking about, people are talking about something, and you may know something about it, and you may want to talk about it. At that point of time, I was not even having an opinion that, I have something that I can talk about it. But interacting with the community, and that's why I always tell everyone whosoever, kind of start their career, either coming out of the college or they have certain level of experience. When people reach out to me, Ashish, I have experience but I don't have experience in cloud. Or sometimes freshers comes with a problem that they don't have the experience, and all the organizations are asking for experience. What I understood is that the best way to understand that experience aspect is the community. Whether you have, experience as in like whether you are a fresher or an experienced person, but in a different domain. You are not in cloud, you are not in DevOps, you are not in MLOps, you are not in data science, whatever domain you may think. Today, the community is running in a such a way. I mean, almost all the technology has some community where you can, connect with them, and just after 2 or 3 interaction, you will be able to kind of figure out whether this thing is for you or not. And
Hmm.
that's what I have learned over last 4 years. I have done only 4 year community. Before that, there was no connectivity. I mean, fortunately, I got good friends who told me or who encouraged me to kind of, talk about it initially. And there were a lot of resistance within, as well as when I'm watching my recording or when I'm talking, when I'm going back, then, sometime I'm realizing that there are certain mistakes I have done during speaking or technical or whatsoever it may be. But those are learning experience. And on top of it, when you talk to people, you get the perspective, which is very, very important aspect of your career. This cannot be learned anywhere else. That I have understood. You cannot learn this aspect, even if you're working in one of the topmost company, in one of the topmost position. The kind of diversity you have here, you are having freshers, you are having senior managers, you are having directors, even sometimes you are having people like VPs who are joining your sessions, or you are meeting them in a meetup or in a conference, and you are talking to them without having that barrier. And that, that kind of opens up that perspective. And you understand, okay, this is what, you, if sometime you will be able to understand, this is what is needed, right? If I want to be in cloud, this is what is needed. You know what, if I want to be in the, for example, Vishwas is doing, this podcast. If I want to do the podcast, this is what is needed. I can see Vishwas, I can see someone else who is doing the podcast, and I can directly see people are happy, people are responding, respecting that particular work. And I can clearly see that I have the benchmark, right? I'm not saying it is a best benchmark or a worst benchmark or whatever it is, but I have the, the skill from where to start. This you cannot get anywhere if you're not interacting with anyone. And that's how this community work, for me also started. Because you bring, you brought that topic that, you started this thing, then you got to know that cloud, and then you make this as an objective. Very simple, similar thing happened to me, 3 years 4 years back, when I was not sure what exactly I'm doing. Even if I am doing something, I mean, I don't know, I mean, is this worth enough to tell people? And when I'm talking to people, when I'm talking to people and want to learn cloud, learn DevOps, learn MLOps, or whatsoever it may be, it can be anything. What I see is that, uh, I mean, because of these community work and all, technical community, and a lot of companies are also encouraging people to interact with it. And I can see that, being fresher, of course, there are challenges. We have faced those challenges. Everyone is facing those challenges. Uh, if at all you are not fortunate one that is coming out of the college and getting the job offer, in the hand. But in India, that's not that's not the situation for everyone, at least, because it's too much, right? I mean, crowd is so, competition is so much and opportunities are less. But how can you bring that extra thing in you? This community is very, very easy way, I could say. You interact with people as a community member, as a community speaker, as a community leader, whatever you can do. I mean, the minimum you can do is take part of the session.
Yep.
And what I have seen is, at least, I have seen 10 people minimum, I would say, I have interacted. They were members, they just joined, and over period they become speaker, they become community, um, collaborator, or some way they were able to lead from the front. I mean, whatever best they thought. I mean, like, whatever the thing they thought, that okay, just like Ashish is sharing something, or Vishwas is sharing something, or someone else is sharing something, I can also share something about that. And that perspective is very, very important to, in current competitive world. Because uh, just in doing your day-to-day job, you don't know what exactly extra that you have, and everyone is looking for that extra. Everyone, right? uh, that is what I wanted to share. Because uh, this community is, you don't even realize what exactly this brings out of you. You only realize, I am watching my 4 years back YouTube recording, and I can see, there is a transformation. I don't care what those transformation means in terms of scale, in terms of number, someone is going to rate me or not. But I can see clearly that there is a transformation. The way I'm talking, the way I am understanding the things, the way people are able to appreciate, that is also one of the things which, which apart from day-to-day work that you actually require. It's a very, very psychological thing, I would say.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think. Thanks for the final outro version of
Yeah.
the complete talk that you
It's
gave,
yeah,
because it summed
yeah,
up
yeah,
everything. It summed up everything. It's not about like okay, I'm just a speaker here, I'm a community organizer. What next? I'll get some goodies, and
right,
that goodies
right.
is not worth more than what you
No,
can build in the future. I think
no, no,
you got a
definitely.
very, very, very bright insight for everything. I think thank you so much, Ashish sir. I was so pissed off today because there was no power in my home, but this brought me a new energy today.
Thank you so much for having me. Actually, it's really, it's good talking to you. Hopefully you'll see that, in future we'll keep on doing it. You are really doing a very great job. So, congratulations to you and wish you
Thank
all
you.
the best, I would say.
Thank
Yep.
you so much, sir. Thank you so much.